We drop into the scene at Lingyang City's elite #1 high school, where the main field is absolutely packed with thousands of students, all standing in dead silent, perfect lines. The air is electric with tension. Every single person here knows this is no ordinary school day. A teacher marches to the front, his voice booming across the anxious crowd. He drops a heavy dose of reality on them. Only those who claw their way into the legendary Hongji class will have a real shot at becoming a warrior. For everyone else, that dream dies today. Then, he lays down the brutal rules of the game. This placement exam is basically their version of the SATs, but on absolute steroids. It's split into 2 make-or-break sections, a cultural test and a martial arts test. The total score possible is 750 points, 225 for book smarts, and a massive 525 for combat skills. But then comes the real gut punch. Only the top 10 students make it into the Hongji class. No mercy, no second chances. The cultural exam is first, and the students are herded into the exam hall, single file. For so many of them, this is the one and only chance they have to change their entire lives. And lost in that sea of faces, a quiet kid clenches his fist. For him, this isn't just a chance, it's everything. Meet our protagonist, Chen Du. His mind flashes back to his freshman year, when he suddenly collapsed in a heap, completely unconscious. His terrified parents immediately pulled him from school, forcing him onto medical leave for 2 whole years. While everyone else was grinding and leveling up, he was left in the dust. He knows, deep down, this is probably his last chance to ever become a warrior, and he is not about to let this opportunity slip through his fingers. As Chen Du makes his way down the corridor toward the exam hall, he runs right into a wall of wannabe thugs blocking his path. One of them just laughs. Well, look what the cat dragged in, he sneers, not even trying to hide his surprise. Didn't actually think you had the guts to show up, Chen Du. Another dude jabs a finger in his face and mocks him. Literally anyone can try out for the Hongji class, I guess. But you've been MIA for 2 years, and you still dare to show your face? The whole crew just erupts in laughter. The leader of the pack steps right up to him, his expression twisting into a nasty sneer. Kids these days are seriously fearless. He leans in, his voice dripping with venom. You get sick, vanish for 2 years, and then just roll up to the Hongji exam like you own the place? Chen Du just stares back, his face a mask of calm. You don't need to worry about me, he says, his voice completely level. You should probably focus on how you're going to pass this test yourself. That sets the bully off. He lunges, his hand shooting out to snatch Chen Du's wrist. But in a flash, Chen Du's own grip clamps down like a steel trap, stopping him cold. The bully's smug expression instantly vanishes, and beads of sweat pop on his forehead. Chen Du releases his grip and pivots, striding toward the exam room without a backward glance. He leaves the stunned group of bullies in his wake, their faces burning with humiliation and rage. One of them seethes. Wasn't that the same punk we used to shove around freshman year? I don't get it. Where'd he get off being so damn arrogant all of a sudden? We should mess him up after the test. The dude whose wrist was grabbed flexes his hand, a sharp pain still shooting through it. He frowns, a dark thought crossing his mind. Was Chen Du's grip a little too strong? The leader snorts and glares at them. Are you guys brain dead? If we jump him now and get caught, we're disqualified, you morons. We wait until the martial arts assessment. That's when we'll get our payback. Inside the exam hall, Chen Du slides into his designated seat and boots up the terminal, looking totally calm and zeroed in, resting his hands on the desk. A hush falls over the room as the rest of the students settle down around him. Meanwhile, the bully's face twists into a vicious grin, a dark, murderous aura practically radiating off him. He promises his crew that during the exam, they're going to permanently cripple Chen Du, because if he gets accidentally maimed during an official assessment, nobody can say a thing about it. Back at his station, Chen Du's eyes are locked on the screen as the first question flickers to life. It's a general knowledge prompt. Briefly describe the current world background and the starting day of the High Martial calendar. Chen Du's brow furrows as the history floods his memory. It all began in the year 2842 of the Old Era, when humanity discovered an alien civilization. It wasn't long before they invaded Earth. In a desperate final act, humanity launched its entire nuclear arsenal. 2 years later, the war was over. We had suffered a catastrophic defeat in the global nuclear war. The death toll was insane, skyrocketing past 5 billion people. Bathed in worldwide nuclear radiation, the human body was pushed beyond its absolute limits. Humanity began to evolve. Horrifying monsters crawled from the ashes of ruined cities, and unbelievably powerful superhumans rose from the chaos. Then, on August 27th, in the year 2860, every adult on the planet simultaneously reached life strength level 2. That single moment shattered the old world and gave birth to a new age. It became known as Day 1 of the High Martial calendar. The test continued, firing off more questions. The second question was about the legendary figures, who made massive contributions during the early years of the High Martial Wars. The third question grilled them on the flawed policies different nations tried to implement to restore global order. A fourth question followed, then a fifth. After blazing through the entire section, the exam was finally over. Chengdu moved the mouse and clicked submit, his expression still perfectly composed. The results flashed onto the screen. A perfect score. He sank back into his chair, the weight of the last 2 years hitting him all at once. Ever since the incident, he hadn't truly slept for 2 whole years. Instead, he was constantly thrashed and relentlessly dragged back into that surreal, nightmarish space. It was in that bizarre dimension that his spiritual power erupted, awakening a flawless photographic memory. That's the only reason why. Even after being off the grid for 2 years, he could stroll in and ace this exam with total confidence. But he knew the score. The cultural exam was small potatoes, worth a mere 225 points. He had to get home and seriously prep for the martial arts assessment, the real main event. Later, Chengdu arrived back at his apartment. As he stepped through the door, his dad was in the kitchen, throwing together some dinner. Chengdu tossed his bag aside, but as he did, a small card slipped from his pocket and fluttered to the ground. His sister, who was nearby, bent down and snatched it up. She hit him with a classic sibling roast about being clumsy and warned him not to lose his precious admission ticket. A few moments later, the family was gathered around the table as dinner was served. The quiet was suddenly broken when Chengdu's father told him to take a look at something. Chengdu's chopsticks froze mid-air. His gaze fell upon a bottle sitting on the table, and his brow furrowed in confusion. He looked up at his father. "Where did you get these chi blood pills?" he asked. His dad just smiled, explaining that since Chengdu's Hongji class exam was just around the corner, he'd bought the pills to give his son a critical boost. Chengdu's expression hardened. "I can get in, even without these." But his father just reached out and ruffled his hair, telling him not to get so worked up about it. He explained that even though he never got the chance to become a warrior, it didn't matter if it was Chengdu or his younger sister, their family could absolutely afford to support their dreams. He told him to just eat up, train hard, and stop worrying. "There's always a way to make money," he said. Chengdu lowered his head, listening in silence. After a long moment, he gave a small nod. The faintest hint of a smile touched his lips. Deep into the night, Chengdu sat cross-legged on his bed, his breathing impossibly slow and even. He couldn't stop thinking about the chi blood pills. A single bottle cost 200,000, a price that had practically drained the family's entire savings. In this society, if you weren't a warrior, you couldn't even guarantee your own family's safety. Chengdu understood this harsh reality better than anyone. He closed his eyes, his focus sharpening to a razor's edge. The success of tomorrow's exam depended entirely on tonight. As his mind plunged deeper, a cold, blue light began to bleed into the darkness. Raw energy swirled and gathered between his hands, pulsing with a silent power, as tiny fragments of crystal materialized and floated around him. In the next instant, his consciousness was violently ripped into a terrifyingly familiar place. Towering, jagged pillars of crystal stretched endlessly around him, flooding the space with an icy, ethereal light. A lone sword was plunged into the ground nearby. Chengdu stood there, perfectly calm, in a place that radiated danger. After what happened 2 years ago, every single night when he drifted off to sleep, he was thrown back into this crystal dimension. The place was crawling with monsters, and their one and only goal was to shatter the crystal core. To protect it, Chengdu had no choice but to fight. If the crystal was ever destroyed, he'd be knocked into a coma for the entire next day. But here's the crazy part. If he died fighting to protect it, he'd wake up instantly, overflowing with energy. At first, Chengdu was too scared to go all in. Because of that hesitation, he failed over and over, his body lying comatose for days on end. But slowly, he started to piece together the pattern. The second he figured out that dying in this crystal hell meant a full-on power-up in reality, the game completely changed. Each wave of monsters he successfully fended off strengthened his spiritual power, little by little. That steady growth supercharged his memory and his ability to understand things. It was the only reason he could keep up in school after missing 2 years. But there was no time to rest. After clearing one wave, the next horde would swarm in after exactly 30 seconds. The cycle repeated relentlessly until he either died or managed to defend the wave. Unfortunately, only the first successful defense of the night actually counted for anything. A split second later, the battlefield erupted into violence again. Chengdu charged forward, his blade tearing through a monster with incandescent fury. The creature exploded in a spray of gore and raw energy, torn to shreds. He twisted through the air, sword in hand, before slamming back down onto the ground. The impact sent a tremor through the entire crystal space, as massive cracks spiderwebbed out beneath him. Heaving for breath and covered in wounds, Chengdu forced his head up. Blood dripped from his lips, turning to steam in the cold air. He He raised a hand and swiped, opening his status window. A glowing blue interface materialized before him, detailing his current condition. He scanned the data with a grim expression. He knew that with his current stats, there was no way he'd make it into the elite Hongji class and become a top-tier warrior. Before he could dwell on it, another alert popped up. The screen announced that the 5th wave of monsters was inbound and told him to get ready. Chengdu's eyes narrowed as he looked up. A moment later, a massive, crimson beast charged out from the shadows. Flames roared from its jaws as it unleashed a terrifying blast of fire breath. Chengdu moved on pure instinct. He kicked off the ground and shot forward like a bullet, dodging through the inferno as blistering heat and shockwaves tore through the air around him. He landed in a hard skid, gripping his sword so tightly his knuckles were white, carving a trench in the cracked floor. The monster was already roaring, preparing another attack. As the beast's claws sliced down with devastating force, Chengdu dodged sideways, his blade flashing up. He then launched himself skyward, his sword aimed like a spear right at the crimson lizard's massive form. The creature thrashed wildly in response. Its colossal tail whipped through the air like a scarlet hurricane, slamming into Chengdu mid-flight and sending him spiraling out of control. A spray of blood erupted from his lips as the impact rattled his very bones. He desperately contorted his body, just barely managing to right himself before impact, tumbling hard across the blackened ground. But the colossal lizard didn't pause for a second. Its monstrous frame charged ahead, its sheer size crushing the air around it. Gritting his teeth, Chengdu forced himself to his feet, his grip on his sword white-knuckled. He'd died so many times before this. But now, finally, he understood the beast's rhythm, its every move. His gaze turned ice-cold. A wave of spiritual energy crackled around him as he stepped forward. Zero hesitation. He sprinted directly at the monster, his blade igniting with power as he lunged upward, aiming for its head in a perfectly timed counter-assault. Chengdu unleashed his signature move, sword flowing light. A blade of pure blue energy shot out, sharp and swift as a winter wind, slicing through the desolate landscape. It smashed into the crimson lizard's hide, erupting in a shower of sparks and raw power. The creature shrieked in agony. Its eyes blazed a furious red as its aura flared violently. It had gone completely feral. The explosive blowback sent Chengdu flying. He twisted midair, barely managing to regain his balance, and landed hard right on the lizard's back. He scowled, knowing he'd gotten sloppy, but thankfully, he wasn't badly hurt. The colossal reptile threw its head back and let out a deafening roar, unleashing a wave of fire and pure killing intent that washed over everything. Chengdu forced his breathing to steady, his knuckles white on his sword's hilt. He had to stay frosty. This time would be different. He was going to win. The red-scaled beast thrashed its enormous body around, its jaws gaping for another world-shaking roar. Gleaming fangs flashed as sparks flew from its throat. Shrouded in a brilliant blue light, Chengdu became a blur, a lightning strike cutting through the air and closing the gap in the blink of an eye. The monster's eyes went wide with shock. Its mouth snapped open even wider, a massive tongue rocketing out, trying to devour him whole. A thunderous crack echoed as Chengdu contorted his body mid-flight, evading the crushing jaws by a hair's breadth. He spun clear, a shockwave of blue energy pulsing around him as the force threw him backward, his boots skidding on nothing but air. He stabilized, his jaw clenched so hard it ached, sweat carving a path down his cheek, but his eyes never left the beast. Suddenly, the crimson beast reared back and unleashed a torrent of fire. A wall of flames incinerated the air between them. Chengdu vaulted into motion again, turning the monster's huge size against it. He dropped low, diving right under the fiery onslaught. His cerulean aura flared to life, burning brighter than ever, and in the next instant, he was rocketing toward the creature's underbelly. His strike came down like a guillotine, the sheer force of it ripping a hole in the air as he made contact. The red-scaled behemoth craned its neck back and let loose another blazing inferno. A river of fire poured from its maw, illuminating its own chest as searing heat radiated outward. Chengdu's reaction was instantaneous. With a shout, his body erupted in a flash of blue. He popped his agility skill, tightened his grip on the hilt, and shot straight up into the sky. His sword descended in a perfect, glowing blue arc. It slammed down onto the monster's skull with absolute, crushing power. The very ground trembled from the impact. The beast let out one final, agonized roar as its titanic body crashed to the earth. Boulders shattered, and shrapnel flew in every direction. A final burst of blue energy pulsed across the monster's corpse. Chengdu landed solid, skidding to a halt as the light enveloping him gradually dimmed. His blade was buried deep in the creature's flesh. The red Goliath was down, utterly defeated. That's when a system notification popped up right in his face. It congratulated him for surviving 5 brutal waves of monster attacks. His spiritual power leveled up by 1. Then another message appeared. Defense waves, complete, and the reward? A void. Immortal Visualization Method. Chen Du just stared, completely stunned. A drop of sweat traced its way down his temple as the insane reward sank in. He figured the spiritual power boost was decent, whatever. But a visualization method? That was a whole different level. Then he remembered what the instructors at school had said. Visualization methods were super rare techniques, skills that let you actively grind your spiritual power. Sure, he could level up his spiritual power from system rewards, but you can never have too much of a good thing, right? The moment he thought that, another system alert flashed, warning the host to get ready. The next wave of monsters was incoming. Chen Du snapped his head to the side, his breath coming in ragged pants. Vapor plumed from his mouth in the cold air. Dust and debris settled around him like a grim snowfall. Then, his eyes narrowed. A bizarre, heavy pressure suddenly descended from the distance. The sky went dark as countless shadows began to materialize. A horde of monsters was amassing, their enormous bodies a tangled, terrifying mass. In the gloom, their eyes ignited with a menacing red glow, every single one radiating pure bloodlust. Chen Du watched them approach, his face hardening into a grim mask. His eyes scanned the situation in a flash. Every single one of those monsters was a full power level above him, and there was a horde of 30. The look on his face said it all. This stage wasn't going to be cleared anytime soon. Snapping back to the real world, he sat cross-legged in his room, his hands clasped as he steadied his breathing. He decided to shelve everything else for the moment and dive into the visualization method first. A luminous blue interface shimmered into existence in his palm, lines of light flowing like a data stream as the technique activated. In the next instant, his entire world warped. He found himself standing on a vast, glowing plane that rippled like water, forged from pure light. Fragments of blue energy drifted through the air. His eyes widened, scanning the bizarre new dimension, trying to process where he was. Then, a terrifying presence manifested in the distance. An immense shadow began to rise. A titan now stood before him. Its colossal body towered into the endless darkness, its countless eyes blazing crimson as they locked onto him with suffocating pressure. Chen Du felt his lungs seize up. He tilted his head back, the scale of it all finally hitting him. Now he understood why they called it a visualization method. Just gazing upon this giant was a trial in itself. Back in reality, he was a statue on his bed. Azure flames of spiritual power erupted around him, pulsing in rhythm with his cultivation. The room fell silent, the only sound a low hum of crackling energy. Suddenly, the door swung open, and his sister's voice cut through the quiet, calling him for dinner. Chen Du stood up, grabbing a towel to wipe down his torso. Sweat carved paths down his newly defined muscles. His physique was undeniably more ripped than before. His sister stared, then a smirk played on her lips. "Wow, you actually got kinda hot," she teased. He shot her a sidelong glance, the corner of his mouth twitching upwards. "Kinda?" he replied coolly. "Was I not before?" The girl puffed her cheeks out in mock outrage. She marched closer, only to yelp as he shot out a hand and ruffled her hair. She squirmed, complaining loudly, "Hey, you're gonna mess it up." For a split second, the girl froze, staring at him with wide, unblinking eyes. A faint blush dusted her cheeks as she muttered under her breath, wondering if her brother had secretly always been this handsome. In front of the mirror, Chen Du quietly studied his own reflection. A thoughtful expression crossed his face. As he catalogued the subtle but powerful shifts in his body, he had to wonder if this was the power of the Void Immortal visualization method. A short while later, he was ready to go, slinging his bag over his shoulder and heading for the door. "I'm heading out for the exam," he called out. From behind him, his father's voice followed. "Be careful on the road." The scene dissolves, rematerializing at the Liang City #1 high school sports arena. Sunlight poured through the high windows, illuminating the vast indoor court as it swarmed with students. Chen Du stood on the arena floor, rolling his arms and loosening up his shoulders. With every movement, he could feel the profound difference in his body. Power flowed effortlessly through his limbs, and his breathing was deep and even. He inwardly confirmed that the Void Immortal visualization method was no joke. He could feel the upgrade in every single fiber of his being. Right in the middle of his warm-up, a sneering voice sliced through the air. Well, if it isn't our so-called genius, Chen Du," someone spat with a ton of sarcasm. "The guy who ghosted school for 2 whole years." Chen Du paused, turning his head just slightly, his expression unreadable. The voice got louder, dripping with arrogance. "I remember this dude. He was a bottom feeder, ditched school for 2 years, and now he thinks he can waltz in here and take the Hongzi class assessment? Give me a break." They laughed. "Guess we should thank him for showing up just to drag the average score down for us." Chen Du regarded them in silence for a moment before speaking in a dead-flat tone. "I'm still leagues better than someone who couldn't even pass the liberal arts exam." The entire atmosphere went ice cold. One of the goons' faces twisted into a mask of pure rage. Another one roared, "The hell did you just say to us?" Chen Du looked at them, a faint, chilling smile on his lips. He said, "If you can't even comprehend words that simple, you're probably not qualified to be taking this test in the first place." The leader's expression instantly darkened. "Don't push your luck, pal," he warned. Chen Du glanced at him. "Don't be so sensitive." Before the powder keg could ignite, another student rushed forward, holding his hands up to de-escalate. "Whoa, guys, let's chill," he said with a nervous laugh. "The assessment is the only thing that matters. If a teacher comes by and sees this, it's not going to end well for anybody." The angry crew clicked their tongues in annoyance as they finally started to back off. The leader shot a look over his shoulder, throwing out a final, cold threat. "Just you wait. You're going to get what's coming to you." The moment they were gone, one of Chen Du's classmates bolted over, pure panic plastered on his face. He grabbed Chen Du's sleeve, his voice trembling. "Dude, you are so dead." Chen Du just played it cool, saying he'd cross that bridge when he came to it, but his classmate frantically shook his head. The guy insisted this was not something Chen Du could just brush off, reminding him that he'd been out of the game for 2 whole years. Leaning in closer, the friend spilled the tea on why Fengrui was acting so damn cocky. Apparently, Fengrui's second uncle had just been promoted to Dean of Academic Affairs. The word on the street was the dean had already slipped Fengrui this year's martial arts assessment questions. Chen Du listened in silence, his expression hardening. In his mind, he knew this meant he had to watch his back. Fengrui could totally team up with the teachers to sabotage him during the test. Just then, a massive holographic panel flared to life, laying out the ground rules for the martial arts assessment. It was a 2-part challenge, a raw strength test, followed by all-out combat duels. A voice commanded all contenders to break off into groups of 10 and head to their designated exam rooms based on their numbers. The strength test was up first. As the students started to form lines, Chen Du's buddy gave him a nudge and told him to stop overthinking and just get in line because it was go time. Moments later, their group was herded into the testing zone. A monstrous punching bag machine loomed before them, sculpted like some freakish beast with menacing, glowing red eyes. The whole vibe in the room instantly got super intense. Then, a new rule dropped. The exam was running on a last-place elimination system. Everyone had to unload their absolute strongest punch on the machine at the exact same time. The ones with the weakest hits would be instantly cut. A wave of nervous whispers rippled through the students. Chen Du's friend grumbled that this year's strength test was ridiculously harsh, but Chen Du just took it all in. He kept his composure, calculating the odds. He knew the combat duel was still coming. So, conserving his stamina was key. His eyes narrowed with focus as he made a split-second decision. He would dominate this with pure speed. A brilliant blue aura erupted around his arm as he stepped up, his fist clenched and his face an emotionless mask. As he got ready, Fengrui cracked his knuckles and let out a cocky laugh, boasting that this test was a total joke, and that he had more than enough power to spare. Suddenly, a booming announcement echoed through the arena, declaring the first group's assessment had officially begun. Chen Du stood there, his expression a mask of calm focus. Across from him, Fengrui's face was twisted into a vicious, arrogant sneer. A wild excitement gleamed in his red eyes as a wave of killing intent rolled off him. In the very next second, Fengrui made his move. He let out a savage roar as he threw his entire body into the punch. A violent crimson energy exploded from his arm as his fist smashed into the machine. A deafening K-boom rocked the entire arena. The massive punching bag caved in, sending powerful shockwaves blasting outwards. As the dust and energy settled, the crowd was dead silent for a split second before absolutely erupting. Students were screaming with hype, shouting that Fengrui was a beast and his power was completely overwhelming. Someone yelled that it was exactly what you'd expect from the top dog, and that he was just on another level. More voices joined in, whispering in awe that they'd heard. Fengrui's power level was already closing in on 1400 Jin. One of Fengrui's cronies smirked and gestured with his chin, saying their boss had already snagged the #1 spot, and that someone was definitely about to get eliminated. And in that instant, Chen Du became a blur. A crushing pressure suddenly slammed down on the entire area as his fist shot forward, and a brutal shockwave detonated across the arena floor. The punching bag imploded with a thunderous crack, its entire massive frame warping violently as the devastating force tore right through it. For a moment, the whole stadium went completely quiet. Students were frozen solid, their eyes bugging out of their skulls in sheer disbelief. Someone finally yelled out in shock, asking what in the world just happened. Another voice trembled as it called out the score. 1500 Jin of force, and he was only at a life strength level of 5.1. Fengrui's confident smirk shattered. He whipped his head around, the veins in his neck bulging as pure, unadulterated shock twisted his features. The whispers turned into a roar. People were demanding to know what class Chen Du was in, how he was this powerful, and why his name had never even cracked the top 50 last year. From the crowd, Chengdu's friend shot up from his seat and screamed at the top of his lungs. "That's my bro!" Behind him, the others just stared, their minds completely blown, unable to process what they just witnessed. Chengdu's classmates were freaking out, wondering when their boy had turned into such an absolute monster. The examiner stood with his arms crossed, his fingers tapping his chin as his eyes narrowed in thought. He calculated that a life strength level of 5.1 should normally max out at around 1000 Jin of force. No one from the elite Hongji class could even dream of hitting a score like that. The idea that a student this insanely gifted was hiding out in a regular class just didn't compute. He figured it had to be a result of Chengdu's martial skills. He then barked out an order, asking to see Chengdu's records. A staff member immediately rushed over with the file. As the examiner read through the document, his gaze grew sharper. The file confirmed it. Chengdu was a regular class student who had taken 2 years off from school and somehow still clocked in a 55% first-order martial strength. The examiner set the file down and glanced at the arena, a spark of genuine curiosity in his eyes. He decided right then and there he was going to see what Chengdu was truly capable of. The scene snaps to the combat arena, where the examiner stood alone in the very center. He strode forward, list in hand, and boomed that the students whose names he called were to step forward for their combat duels. The examiner's voice rang out, calling for Chengdu and Feng Rui to enter the ring. The two fighters faced off, the contrast between them stark and immediate. Chengdu was the picture of ice-cold composure, while Feng Rui's face was twisted into a cocky, hostile sneer. A buzz of whispers rippled through the watching students. Someone muttered that even though Chengdu was just back at school, his power level test score was just insane. They debated if he could actually clutch the win this time. Another student just scoffed, shaking his head and saying it was a long shot. He was betting everything on Feng Rui. These duels were won with martial technique, not just raw power. Brute strength alone gave you zero edge in the arena. Feng Rui took a deliberate step forward, aiming his weapon right at Chengdu. He sneered, warning him not to assume that winning their last encounter meant he'd get lucky a second time. Chengdu paused and turned his head slowly, his expression perfectly relaxed. The faintest hint of a smirk touched his lips as he shot back that he hoped Feng Rui could keep that same energy for later. In an instant, the tension in the arena became thick enough to cut with a knife. Feng Rui lunged first. He surged forward with his metal staff, his attacks sharp and relentless. His foot smashed into the floor as he swung, the sheer force of it tearing through the air. Sparks flew from the weapon's path, an attack designed to overwhelm his opponent, with nothing but pure martial might. At the exact same moment, Chengdu moved. He flowed forward, his body light and perfectly poised. As the staff came crashing down, his sword rose to meet it in a flawless block. The clash of metal was deafening, sending a shockwave pulsing across the ring. In the next breath, Chengdu launched his counter. His sword flashed in a rising arc, forcing Feng Rui into a panicked retreat. Feng Rui's eyes bulged as he desperately contorted his body, barely evading a direct hit. The sheer force of the blow still launched him, sending him tumbling through the air before he slammed hard onto the ground. Feng Rui crashed down onto one knee, gripping his staff, his entire body trembling as he tried to stabilize himself. His face was a twisted mask of disbelief and fury. A single thought screamed through Feng Rui's mind. That spot in the Hongdai class was his, and Chengdu wasn't going to take it. A savage aura exploded from Feng Rui's body. His eyes blazed a furious red as he roared and catapulted himself forward once more, channeling every last shred of his power into one desperate all-or-nothing strike. He brought his weapon crashing down with absolute force. Chengdu's reaction was instantaneous. He stepped into the attack and thrust his sword forward. A razor-thin beam of power shot out, slicing through the air like a blade of pure light. Chengdu's gaze was ice-cold as sparks drifted past his face. He mused to himself that fighting actual people was a little different from battling monsters in the crystal space. And in that next microsecond, he was in motion. His body pivoted sharply as orange light flared to life around him. He drove forward and struck, his attack, a blazing, spinning arc of destruction. The energy detonated outward, ripping through the arena with ferocious momentum. The impact hit like a falling pillar of pure light. The arena itself shook as the attack slammed directly into Feng Rui. He was blasted backward, his body spinning out of control as the shockwave pulverized the ground beneath him. Dust, rubble, and shattered fragments exploded into the air. But Chengdu wasn't done. His eyes narrowed, and he pressed his advantage. Instantly, he saw the opening. Feng Rui's footing was a wreck. Before his rival could even process what happened, a chilling blue light erupted from Chengdu. A blade-like wind swept across the arena as he unleashed his technique. The attack descended like a swift breeze through a dark forest, clean and precise, but with a devastatingly sharp edge. The blue energy surged, slashing straight through Feng Rui's pathetic defense. Feng Rui's body was lifted off its feet, completely helpless as the power consumed him. A violent cough racked his body. Blood sprayed from his lips as his eyes went wide with pain. In that same moment, Feng Rui's hand moved. A short blade flashed as he smoothly drew a hidden weapon, his expression turning cold and determined. Chengdu didn't even flinch. He closed the distance, his sword slashing down in a brutal arc, the strike charged with overwhelming power. The blow landed squarely on Feng Rui. Sparks erupted at the point of contact. Feng Rui tried to fight back, his face contorting in a mixture of shock and terror. But before he had a chance to recover, Chengdu was already there. A heavy fist smashed directly into Feng Rui's face. The crack of the impact was sharp and final. Feng Rui's eyes rolled back in his head as he was sent flying. He crashed to the ground in a heap, limbs slack, completely and utterly knocked out. Model. For a split second, the arena went dead silent. In the stands, jaws dropped. Then a single voice shattered the quiet, screaming what everyone was thinking. No shot. Chengdu actually won. How is that even possible? Another student yelled, completely shook. Whispers erupted through the crowd. Was he on something? Did he cheat? There had to be an explanation for this insane upset. Down on the arena floor, Feng Rui wasn't moving. At all. Unfazed, the examiner raised a hand, his voice cutting through the noise as he ordered the medical team to check on Feng Rui's status. He then announced the next duel, telling the fighters to get ready. But just as Chengdu turned to leave, the examiner stopped him. Chengdu, wait. Chengdu froze, turning his head. A single bead of sweat traced a path down his face, but his expression was a mask of pure calm. His instructor, Teacher Ling, stood there, hands clasped behind his back, his face completely unreadable. Chengdu stepped forward, dipping his head respectfully. My apologies, sir, he said, his voice low. I got lost in the fight. I couldn't control my power. Ling studied him for a long moment. Injuries are a part of these duels, he stated, his tone perfectly level. It happens. Don't sweat it, he continued. Just be more mindful next time. You fought well today. As he was about to dismiss him, he added casually, and make sure you stretch when you get home. Chengdu straightened up. Thank you, teacher. While Chengdu walked away, Ling's gaze drifted toward the exit where the medics had carried Feng Rui off. He replayed the beatdown in his head. Feng Rui got demolished, yet he had no significant external wounds. It could only mean one thing. Chengdu's technique was on a whole other level. Ling's gloved fist tightened almost imperceptibly, his face etched with deep thought. He barked an order to a nearby student. Wang Sai, get the principal on the line. Immediately. Sir, yes sir, Wang Sai yelled, snapping to attention. Meanwhile, Chengdu was already stalking down a desolate corridor. The soft echo of his own footsteps was the only sound. It was still early, he thought. His dad and sister wouldn't be back for hours. His walk ended in front of a massive piece of tech, the virtual combat pod. He stared it down, his expression unreadable. He couldn't afford real one-on-one sparring sessions, but the school gave every student access to one of these pods. He moved closer. He knew the drill. All he had to do was lie down inside, and the system would instantly pair him with an opponent at his skill level for a training sim. He'd spent all his time grinding against real monsters in that crystal space, so he'd barely even touched this virtual combat system. The result? His current rank was a pathetic bronze. Reaching out, he jacked the cable into the port, and the machine whirred to life. Then, a new thought surfaced. He had absolutely clapped Feng Rui today, and that meant there was a very real chance someone would come looking for trouble. They'd do anything to keep him out of the elite Hongji class. Chengdu stared into the open maw of the pod, his eyes fixed on the seat within. He knew what he had to do. Every single fight in this pod was automatically uploaded and logged on the Blue Star Youth rankings. This wasn't just some leaderboard. This was the one that mattered, the one for students prepping for the college exams. They called it the Genius Rankings. This list was pure, raw martial skill, recognized across every zone on the planet. Even some of the top dogs from the Hongji class couldn't crack this ranking. He slid into the seat, his eyes drifting shut. The path forward was crystal clear. If he could just get his name on the Blue Star Youth rankings, he could force his way into the Hongji class on pure skill alone. No one could deny him then. The pod hummed to life. Lights flashed, and the world dissolved, reforming into the crisp, sterile digital landscape of the virtual space. His avatar materialized on a stark white platform, his mind a sea of calm. Ever since he unlocked the crystal space, this pod had just been collecting dust. Might as well start with a quick warm-up, he figured. Shimmering blue fragments of data began to coalesce in front of him. He scanned the area, a little confused. Where was his opponent? He didn't even have time to process the thought. A serene voice echoed through the simulation, and in the blink of an eye, a blur of motion dropped from the sky. A figure with vibrant purple hair, descending with lethal grace. Her blade was a flash of silver, aimed right at his throat, but the instant she moved to strike, so did he. He spun, whipping his sword up just in time to intercept the ambush. The impact was explosive. Shockwaves blasted across the digital platform. The girl, however, landed as light as a feather, a smirk playing on her lips. "Not bad," she purred. "Your reflexes are pretty sharp." Then, her eyes narrowed, her expression turning, deadly serious. "But this isn't some school test where we wait for the bell to ring. In a real fight, you hesitate, you die." Chengdu pushed himself back to his feet, his grip on his sword tightening. His voice was cold steel. "Lesson learned. You won't get another chance for a cheap shot." An intense blue aura erupted around his body. They charged, becoming a whirlwind of motion as they clashed again. Steel screamed against steel, over and over. Arcs of blue energy ripped through the air as Chengdu went on a relentless offensive. He drove her back, step by painful step, before unleashing his technique. Azure Dragon Thrust. His blade lunged forward like a phantom dragon, the attack impossibly fast and overwhelming. For the first time, the girl's eyes widened in shock as she scrambled to get out of its path. In that final fleeting moment, her eyes widened in shock as she recognized his technique, calling it out by name, the Azure Dragon Thrust. She pointed out the obvious, it was a piercing move, but he was swinging it like a slashing technique. Unfazed, Chengdu lunged again, unleashing another brutal assault. While gracefully dodging his attack, the mysterious girl's tone shifted, suddenly becoming like a mentor's. She lectured him, explaining that the four flowing light forms were never meant to be rigid. The real key was grasping the fundamental nature of the martial art itself. Suddenly, everything clicked in Chengdu's mind. He finally understood that sword mastery should never be caged by strict rules. True power needed to be fluid, completely unbound by names or patterns. A brilliant crescent of light sliced through the air with his next swing. But just as it did, a nagging question surfaced in his thoughts. How did this girl know his sword style inside and out? Before he could dwell on it, her voice cracked through the air like a whip, warning him to stay focused. She was a bolt of lightning. Her power was immense, and Chengdu couldn't even identify the foundation of her martial arts. Each blow was completely foreign, yet executed with terrifying perfection. The girl somersaulted through the air, pressing her assault without a moment's pause. Chengdu parried with his sword, but for a split second, his concentration wavered. She instantly capitalized on that tiny mistake. She roared that he'd dropped his defense. A violent explosion of purple energy erupted as her strikes hammered into his body. Chengdu let out a frustrated curse as he was blasted backwards. The force of the blow shattered the very air around him, causing the virtual arena to crumble into nothing. A holographic system message materialized, declaring the outcome. The player in the pig mask, Chengdu, had been defeated. The match concluded with the young girl as the victor, and 10 victory points were added to her score. As the simulation faded to black, one last realization struck Chengdu. With her insane power level, she could have crushed him outright, but instead, she chose to use a surprise attack. Now, floating in the virtual lobby, Chengdu tapped his temple, the girl's lesson echoing relentlessly inside his head. He needed to focus on the essence of the skill, just as she said. His thoughts drifted back to his own flowing light sword style. The style had a total of 4 forms, and the one he hadn't truly mastered was the Azure Dragon Thrust, the piercing technique. At its core, it was an assassin's move, swift, precise, and lethal. The revelation struck him like a physical blow. Assassins thrived on surprise attacks, while his own approach was completely direct and predictable. With newfound conviction, Chengdu's hand shot out, tapping the holographic interface. He was ready to test this new philosophy in a real fight. Instantly, he initiated the next match. A colossal challenger materialized before him, a mountain of a man swinging a devastating chain weapon. Chengdu glanced at the enormous iron ball that was carving a trench in the ground and immediately felt the immense pressure. He grumbled internally. First I get some high-level trickster, and now the system pits me against a dude with a massive weapon advantage? He briefly questioned the sanity of the matchmaking algorithm, but then pushed the thought aside. A surge of blue light erupted from under his feet as Chengdu rocketed forward, closing the gap in an instant. He remained perfectly calm. The other guy might have the reach, but Chengdu's own martial prowess was far superior. The advantage was his to claim. A pillar of brilliant sword energy erupted upwards, compelling the behemoth to plant his feet and defend. A shower of sparks and crackling energy filled the air as the attack sliced forward. The very ground began to shudder, as if reality itself was being ripped at the seams. The hulking man sneered, roaring that he was using his sword all wrong. He ridiculed Chengdu, scoffing that just because his technique was a little more polished, it didn't give him the right to be so reckless. But before the taunt could even fade, the blade's energy slammed home. A spray of blood erupted from the man's lips as his massive frame was violently hurled backward. His face contorted with agony and disbelief. As the sheer force completely overpowered him, the iron ball chained to his wrist was violently knocked off its trajectory. The collision detonated with a thunderous boom, echoing like the drums of war. The colossal weapon was sent careening wildly off course. A blinding flash of blue light erupted as Chengdu made his move. The intent behind his blade pulsed outwards like a furious gale, expanding in waves. He unleashed his next technique, Breeze Beneath the Forest. The massive iron ball began to shudder violently as the shockwave slammed into it. The giant's eyes bulged in astonishment. He never anticipated the attack would pivot so abruptly. Before he could even process it, Chengdu completely vanished from his line of sight. An instant later, he reappeared directly behind him, his body twisting in midair, driving his sword downward with pinpoint accuracy. The blade sliced clean through the big man's defenses, freezing the look of utter disbelief on his face. He cried out in pure shock, his mind unable to comprehend how Chengdu had gone from being in front of him to behind him in the span of a single breath. Brilliant blue energy coiled around the blade like a living serpent. Azure Dragon Thrust. The attack plunged forward with devastating, explosive power. The man's body convulsed violently as a torrent of blood spewed from his mouth. The sheer, overwhelming force utterly crushed him. His iron ball crashed to the floor with a deafening boom, its chains clattering emptily in its wake. A system window flashed to life, congratulating Chengdu on his victory and awarding him 10 points. Chengdu stood frozen, slowly lowering his blade. As he stared down at his own hands, ethereal blue particles dissolved into the air around him. It hit him then. That was the very first time he'd ever pulled off the Azure Dragon Thrust. Chengdu remained perfectly still, his pig mask angled just so as the last of the blue light faded away. A question bloomed in his mind. He finally understood why the sword was called ingenious. As the true meaning settled in, he realized it wasn't just about cleverness or skill. It was about pure adaptability. The sword could be rigid or fluid, concealed or brandished, striking like a crack of thunder, absolutely ferocious and unstoppable. Or it could glide like the surface of a placid lake. As the ultimate move of the flowing light sword technique, the Azure Dragon Thrust was never meant to be stiff. It was designed to teach him this one simple truth. The blade wasn't locked into a single form or style. You could wield it with honor, out in the open, or use it for a sudden, devastating sneak attack. Standing in the silence, Chengdu let his sword dip, his gaze behind the mask turning razor sharp. He got it now. The sword was a weapon that refused to be defined. A system notification popped up. Congratulations, host. Flowing light sword technique proficiency has climbed from first order 89% to first order 90%. A faint smile touched Chengdu's lips. Then another message appeared, its tone almost pushing him forward. Combat deepens understanding. One more fight. Another notification flashed. Congratulations, host. Flowing light sword technique proficiency increased. Chengdu's grip on his sword tightened. The system alerts just kept coming, one after another, as his comprehension skyrocketed. Every single clash sharpened his instincts. Every duel perfected his blade. After grinding out win after win and honing his sword skills, Chengdu was suddenly starving and decided it was time for a break, stepping out of his virtual combat pod. A system voice chimed, congratulating him and announcing he had officially broken into the top 10,000 of the Blue Star Youth rankings. Chengdu froze mid-step. His eyes shot wide as he stared into nothing, completely stunned by the words he just heard. He whispered the phrase back to himself, barely able to process it. Top 10,000 of the Blue Star Youth rankings? After a beat of stunned silence, he commanded the system, show me all my ranking details. The interface shifted instantly. Blue Star Youth rankings, rank 6,229. 7th Ecological Zone Youth rankings, rank 600. 54. Giant Bear Domain Youth rankings, rank 55. Purple Cloud District Youth rankings, rank 7. Liang City Youth rankings, rank 1. The system calmly confirmed his request. Chengdu's breath caught in his throat as he scanned the results. His expression morphed from pure shock to wild excitement. He never, ever expected that. Mastering the Azure Dragon Thrust would make him number 1 among all the youth in Liang City. His fingers dug into the armrest of his chair. A massive grin stretched across his face as the hype just exploded out of him. Deep down, he knew this sealed the deal. His spot in the elite Hongji class was practically guaranteed. After that, Chengdu was just walking down the road, with a backpack slung over his shoulder, making his way home. But out of nowhere, someone bellowed his name. Chengdu stopped and glanced over his shoulder. A middle-aged man was standing a short distance away, pointing a finger right at him with a nasty scowl. The man started chewing him out, saying it was disrespectful to see a teacher and not even offer a greeting. It was Fang Leguo, the Dean of Academic Affairs at Long City No. 1 High School, and Fang Rui's second uncle. Chengdu turned to face him fully and offered a polite greeting, calling him teacher. The students nearby all went quiet, watching the drama unfold. A few of them noticed Chengdu's armband, their expressions shifting as they put two and two together. Fang Leguo's scowl deepened as he spoke again. He announced that for this semester, as the dean, he would be personally handling uniform inspections. He jabbed a finger at Chengdu and demanded, "And just what is that you're wearing?" Chengdu glanced down at his clothes and replied coolly, "It's the school uniform." A couple of students nearby had to stifle their laughs. "Silence!" Fang Liguo roared, but the whispers kept spreading. Some kids muttered that Chengdu was so cooked that Feng Rui was still laid up in the hospital and his uncle was definitely out for blood. Others were gossiping that they heard Chengdu only won because he was using illegal power-ups and totally deserved whatever was coming to him. Another kid mumbled in confusion, "Wait, I thought Chengdu was actually just that cracked?" That's when Feng Liguo finally snapped. He whipped up a wooden baton and brought it crashing down, screaming, this, and this. All of it is a violation." But Chengdu just tilted his head slightly, easily dodging every single strike. His expression never changed. He stated calmly, "Everything I'm wearing is within school regulations. I don't understand what the violation is." Fang Liguo's face contorted with pure fury. He pointed at Chengdu and shrieked, "How dare you talk back to me?" The baton swung down again. Only this time, Chengdu's hand shot out and snatched it right out of the air. The movement was sharp, clean, and absolute. The attack was stopped dead. For a second, Feng Liguo just froze, his eyes wide with disbelief. He then escalated his tirade, screaming that Chengdu was an insubordinate punk who had no respect for his teachers. He vowed to report Chengdu to the principal and see him expelled. But just then, a cool voice sliced through the chaos, asking who was looking for him. There stood Chengdu, gripping the shattered baton, his face an unreadable mask. Feng Liguo went rigid, his head whipping around. Two men were striding forward from the parting crowd. One was Li Mu, the principal of Liang City No. 1 High School. The other was none other than Wang Anquan, the mayor of Liang City. An absolute silence descended upon the students. Feng Liguo scrambled over, jabbing an accusing finger and shouting that Chengdu was the one, the troublemaker. Li Mu paused directly in front of Chengdu, studying him intently. His stern expression softened just a fraction as he asked if he was, in fact, Chengdu. Chengdu, caught off guard for a split second, simply nodded and confirmed his identity. A faint smile touched Li Mu's lips as he spoke again. He explained that they had made the trip specifically to find him, gesturing to the man at his side and introducing Mayor Wang. Chengdu instantly straightened up and offered a polite greeting before asking what this was all about. Mayor Wang just let out a booming laugh. He announced that Chengdu had not only seized the No. 1 spot in the Liang City youth rankings, but had also cracked the top 1% of the entire Blue Star Youth rankings. Because of this monumental achievement, he naturally had to come and meet the prodigy responsible for such a feat. The statement detonated like a bomb. Feng Liguo froze solid, his eyes bulging as he screeched in disbelief, questioning if Chengdu had actually made it into the top 1% of the Blue Star Youth rankings. Behind him, the crowd of students stared with their jaws on the floor as the staggering reality crashed down on them. Shocked whispers erupted. Everyone's eyes were locked on Chengdu with newfound awe, murmuring about how insanely powerful he truly was. One student muttered that with that kind of raw talent, there was no way Chengdu would ever need drugs to wipe the floor with Feng Ru. Others buzzed that Brother Du was such a beast he was guaranteed a spot in the legendary Hongji class. Cutting through the commotion, Li Mu calmly instructed Chengdu to follow them to the conference room for now. He mentioned there were important matters they needed to go over. Feng Liguo was left a crumpled, forgotten mess on the ground. Chengdu gave a crisp nod and a simple yes, turning to walk away with the principal and the mayor, leaving a sea of silent, stunned students in his wake. The scene cuts to the conference room. Chengdu stepped inside, offering another respectful greeting. Two other students were already waiting. One was Liu Bo, a senior from Liang City No. 2 High School, who held the second-place rank among Liang City's youth. The other was Mo Leitri, the undisputed ace of Liang City No. 1 High School's prestigious Hongji class. They shared a quick, assessing glance. They were strangers, their eyes locked for a moment before flicking away simultaneously. After everyone was seated, a heavy, competitive silence filled the room. Wang Anquan leaned in, getting right down to business. He laid out the situation. The 100 cities, governed by the Purple Cloud District, were gearing up for a massive competition between high school seniors, and each city was required to send its top 3 martial arts students based on the official rankings from 6 p.m. the night before. These elite teams would be supervised by a warrior ranked level 15 or higher to compete in a 3-day event called the 100 Cities Championship, hosted at High City No. 1 High School. As the mayor detailed the plan, Chengdu listened with quiet intensity. Then, Mayor Wang unveiled the prize pool. He revealed that the top 10 champions of the tournament would be awarded varying numbers of college, entrance exam bonus points, and substantial cash prizes, with the lowest tier starting at 10 extra points, and a prize of 100,000. Chengdu's eyes narrowed slightly, his entire demeanor sharpening. Mayor Wang locked eyes with him and posed the ultimate question. Was he willing to fight for their city? But before Chengdu could respond, Mo Latry raised a hand to interject. He asked the mayor why. If the selection was based on martial skill rankings, the competition wasn't being held using virtual combat. Mayor Wang's reply was steady. He stated that when compared to virtual simulations, the district's top brass felt that a real-world battle was a far better measure of a warrior's true skill. He elaborated that high-level warriors would be on site to guarantee everyone's safety. All participants would be equipped with specially designed suits that would standardize their life strength, leveling the playing field. Chengdu calmly calculated his odds. At his current level of martial ability, he was confident he was already within the top 20 of the whole Purple Cloud district. Factoring in his insane growth rate, snagging a spot in the top 3 didn't seem like a problem at all. His gaze lowered, his expression resolute. Even if he missed the top 10, this tournament was the perfect opportunity to see where he truly stood among his peers. There was no reason to stress over it. From across the table, the mayor offered a gentle smile, advising him not to put too much pressure on himself. After a short, deliberate pause, Chengdu raised his hand, his voice ringing with clarity. He declared that he would participate. Right beside him, a confident smile spread across Mo Latry's face as he chimed in that he would join as well. The mayor beamed with pride, proclaiming that true heroes are always forged in the fires of youth. He let them know they'd get a ping once the departure time was set. With that, they were free to head back to class. But as Chengdu stepped out, a heavy burden settled on his mind. If he could just crack the top 3 in the 100 Cities battle, his parents, they could finally stop grinding themselves into dust every single day. His fists clenched. The path forward was crystal clear. Chengdu's resolve hardened. Securing a top 3 spot in the 100 Cities battle was non-negotiable. With that fire lit inside him, he pushed open the classroom door. He stepped through the frame, pausing to scan the room. Normally, every desk in a classroom would be marked with a student's name, but here in the Hongji class, they were all blank. After a brief hesitation, he figured he'd just grab any open seat for the time being. But the moment he pulled back a chair, a harsh voice roared at him to get lost. A huge hand slammed down beside him. The voice demanded to know who the hell he thought he was, daring to sit in that spot. Chengdu's head snapped to the side. Towering over him was a massive, brawny student, Peng Hu, ranked 10th in the entire Hongji class. His colossal frame made him look like a literal bear had just wandered into the classroom. Peng Hu leaned in, a mocking smirk spreading across his face as he looked down on Chengdu. Unfazed, Chengdu met his gaze and asked what century they were living in, and if people were seriously still pulling this kind of bullying stunt in school. The tension in the room instantly spiked. Before Peng Hu could even fire back a response, someone else stepped between them, a hand landing gently on Chengdu's shoulder. It was Mo Latry, speaking calmly. He told Peng Hu that Chengdu was new here and didn't know the rules of the Hongji class yet. A knot tightened in Chengdu's chest. Mo Latry had closed the distance between them without making a single sound. That detail alone sent alarm bells ringing in his head. He instantly calculated that this guy's life strength had to be at least 2 full levels above his own. Peng Hu just let out a cold snort and waved his hand dismissively. He sneered that Chengdu got lucky. On account of Mo Latry, he'd let it slide this time. Then, Mo Latry began to explain the system. He said that since this was Chengdu's first day in the Hongji class, he probably had no idea that your status and power here were decided by your seat number. He laid it out. Every single month, the Hongji class holds a brutal seat ranking battle. Through raw combat, they determine everyone's place in the hierarchy, the bottom 10 students. They're forced to stand through every class for the entire next month. Chengdu listened, his mind racing. This was a shock. He never imagined the pressure to compete in the Hongji class would be this insane. But Mo Latry wasn't finished. He explained that, since it was the start of the month, the official rankings were already locked in. He then gestured forward, telling Chengdu that, in just a moment, he'd have to fight for his own seat number in a series of challenges. Chengdu's eyes narrowed slightly. He asked calmly if getting a seat was the only perk, or if there were other benefits tied to your rank. He explained that the answer would determine exactly how much power he was willing to show. The answer was simple. The higher your rank, the better your life. Why? Because your seat number dictates the amount of resources you're given every month. The moment he heard that, a spark ignited in Chengdu's eyes. Now this was something worth fighting for. With resources on the line, he had to aim for the absolute highest rank he could seize. His determination solidified into steel. Just then, another voice cut through the chatter. Class was officially starting. Everyone was ordered to move immediately to the combat room next door. The students filed in, lining up in perfect rows as a massive open space stretched out before them. The instructor laid out the rules. Each challenger could issue up to 3 challenges. Based on their performance, they'd be assigned a seat. Chengdu took it all in. Without a shred of hesitation, He strode forward and raised his hand. His voice rang out, clear and confident. "I challenge seat number 10. The second those words left his lips, the entire room's atmosphere shifted. His eyes widened as a single bead of sweat traced a path down his temple. A wave of whispers erupted around them. The other students just stared, their faces masks of pure disbelief. Someone gasped that Chengdu was going for a top 10 spot right out of the gate. Another murmured that he looked like a quiet, unassuming guy, but his first move was unbelievably bold. The doubt came just as fast. A few students started reasoning that, even if Chengdu's martial arts skills were off the charts, his life strength was way lower than everyone else in the Hongji class. They were convinced that, on its own, it wasn't nearly enough to breach the top 10. But Chengdu remembered the rule perfectly. The resource payout for 10th place was a staggering 50% higher than for 11th place. That gap alone made the risk worth taking. He tightened his grip on his sword. His gaze became a razor's edge, calm, focused, and absolute. Across from him, the student ranked 10th burst into laughter. He openly mocked Chengdu, saying he'd barely been in the Hongji class for 5 minutes and was already pulling a stunt like this. He warned him not to start crying when he got his butt handed to him. Chengdu just looked at him, his expression unreadable, and asked a simple question. "So, you're number 10? The burly student just grinned. "Oh, you bet I am." He leaned in, a smug grin plastered across his face, and sneered. "Looks like your luck just ran out, Chengdu." The instructor's voice boomed across the room. "Pang Hu, get your protective gear on and enter the arena from the side." Someone in the crowd watched Chengdu, thinking to themselves that the kid seemed to have a rock-solid composure, and yet, he was practically vibrating with the need to prove himself. Still, they figured this was for the best, let him get knocked around a bit. You could even call it a training exercise. With that, Pang Hu stomped forward, wrapping both hands around his monstrous warhammer. His bulky frame radiated sheer pressure as he planted his feet. Across the arena, Chengdu faced him down, his sword held in a relaxed grip. The air in the combat room grew thick with tension, but Chengdu's expression never wavered. His eyes were sharp, laser-focused, without a single trace of fear. A powerful voice thundered through the hall. "The match has begun." A vicious grin split Pang Hu's face as he roared at Chengdu. "So, you ready? Get prepared to clutch my leg and scream for mercy." Chengdu just stood his ground, a faint smile touching his lips, as he replied softly, "We'll just have to see about that." In the blink of an eye, Pang Hu made the first move. He swung his colossal hammer with terrifying power, but Chengdu remained perfectly still. A subtle aura shimmered around him as he glided forward without an ounce of panic. Pang Hu sneered, yelling, "Way too slow, you loser." The massive hammer crashed down towards him with overwhelming force. From the sidelines, the other students watched with wide eyes. They shouted that with a speed difference that huge, Chengdu's life strength was an entire rank below Pang Hu's. A few of them had already written him off, saying Chengdu was done for and was about to get wrecked. They knew that even a point, one level difference in life strength could totally decide a battle, never mind a full-on rank gap. To them, Chengdu's defeat was a foregone conclusion, but the instructor, watching from the side, suddenly narrowed his gaze. He muttered in utter shock. His life strength. It's reached level 5.2. Just yesterday, it was only 5.1. He couldn't wrap his head around how Chengdu boosted it to 5.2 in a single day. At the same time, Pang Hu was laughing his head off, absolutely certain he'd won. "It's already over," he bellowed. His warhammer slammed down with pulverizing force. But in the next instant, Pang Hu's expression completely froze. He stared ahead, dumbfounded, unable to process what had just happened. Pure shock washed over his face as beads of sweat started to form on his forehead. Chengdu had vanished. In a single, impossibly smooth motion, Chengdu had dropped his body and pivoted his stance. His sword ascended with flawless precision. A blinding flash of blue light erupted from below. Before Pang Hu could even react, Chengdu's blade surged upward like a raging tsunami, carrying an unbelievable amount of power. The force of the strike detonated, launching Pang Hu's gigantic body clean into the air. Pang Hu's eyes bulged as his body was shot toward the ceiling. He could only let out a strangled grunt, his mind unable to comprehend how the tables had turned so completely. Pang Hu's enormous frame was sent cartwheeling through the air as he shrieked in disbelief. He was rocketed upwards, completely powerless against the explosive strike from below. Dozens of students gaped at the ceiling in shock as his huge body sailed across the combat hall. A moment later, Pang Hu slammed back down onto the floor with a deafening crash. The entire floor shook from the impact as dust and shock waves rippled outwards. The surrounding students' jaws were on the floor, absolutely floored by what they just saw. Nobody imagined the fight would be over in a flash. Chengdu stood there, perfectly composed, his sword still in hand. From the side, the instructor's brain finally caught up, recognizing the technique he'd used. He stared at Chengdu's blade and asked in total awe, "Was that the Azure Dragon Thrust?" He stammered that Chengdu's martial skill was already at first-order perfection. Chengdu simply gave a calm reply. He said he'd just had a breakthrough the night before. Hearing this, everyone else was even more blown away. Reaching 90% mastery in a single night was something none of them could even fathom. To them, it sounded absolutely bonkers. Just then, the instructor's voice rang out across the combat room, declaring the official result. "The winner is Chengdu." Chengdu let out a small sigh and lowered his sword, his expression returning to its usual unreadable calm now that the victory was sealed. The students packed around the arena absolutely erupted. They pointed at Chengdu, shouting that he actually managed to win, even with a full-level disadvantage. Some of them couldn't process what they were seeing. Others screamed that it was unbelievable. He had snatched the win with just one move. Lost in the crowd, Moleta muttered that Chengdu was definitely a late, blooming genius. The instructor stepped forward and announced that Chengdu had officially claimed seat number 10. He then asked if Chengdu planned to keep challenging for an even higher rank. Chengdu calmly shook his head and turned him down. He explained that even if he climbed a few more spots, the upgrade in resources wouldn't be that big of a deal. It was smarter to conserve his energy. The moment he finished speaking, the surrounding students swarmed him. One of them grinned, pulling out his phone and asking, "Yo, let me get your VChat. We're classmates, man. We should totally connect." The crowd went wild, with everyone suddenly scrambling to get his contact info. A little flustered by the instant fame, Chengdu just played it cool and agreed. Just then, Panhu painfully dragged himself back to his feet. All that swagger from before, completely shattered. He looked up at Chengdu, his eyes wide with fear, and actually called him Big Brother, begging him to forget all the trash he'd just talked. Chengdu just stared back, totally unfazed, thinking to himself that this guy was a serious clout chaser. After the match wrapped up, Chengdu was just trying to blend back in with the other students, but a sharp voice cut through the chatter, calling his name. "My office. After class," the instructor ordered. Chengdu whipped his head around. Like, what did I do now? A few minutes later, he was tapping on the office door. A steady voice from the other side told him to enter. Chengdu walked in and was met with an intense scene. The principal was hunched over his desk, laser-focused on some documents, and the tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. A heavy, formal silence filled the principal's office. Breaking the quiet, Chengdu's instructor grilled the principal about any open special recruitment slots for two of the top schools, Mount Everest and Mount Tai Martial Arts University. The principal, thrown off guard, gestured for the instructor to take a seat, asking what this was all about. The instructor didn't mince words, revealing he wanted to see if Chengdu had a shot at getting in through a special recommendation. Hearing this, the principal's face grew serious. He laid it out plain and simple. Both Mount Everest and Mount Tai were elite institutions, part of the legendary 8 great schools. The absolute minimum entry requirement was a martial skill level of first-order perfection. He pointed out that Chengdu was just 1% shy of that benchmark, but that final 1%, it was a wall almost no one could climb. Instructor Ling Yun, losing patience, cut him off, insisting there was nothing more to debate. He reminded the principal about the martial skill tester right there in the office and demanded they let Chengdu prove himself. The principal let out a weary sigh, muttering that Ling Yun was always making things complicated. Still, he caved, pointing to a machine in the corner. He explained its max reading was first order, advanced, making it the ideal tool to gauge a student's true power. Without a second's hesitation, Ling Yun grabbed Chengdu's shoulder and shoved him toward the device. He ordered Chengdu to unleash the exact same attack he'd used in the seat battle, aiming for the machine's core sensor. Chengdu gave a calm nod and stepped up to the plate. His entire demeanor shifted, his gaze locking onto the testing machine with chilling intensity. He slowly, deliberately, raised his sword. The room fell utterly silent, the air crackling with the energy he was gathering. In a flash, he exploded into motion. Chengdu unleashed his signature technique, Azure Dragon Thrust. A blinding surge of blue light erupted from his blade, rocketing toward the testing device with apocalyptic force. A deafening crack echoed off the walls. The testing device didn't just break, it completely disintegrated under the raw power of Chengdu's assault. Shrapnel flew across the floor as the machine smoked and collapsed into a pile of junk. The principal was frozen solid, just staring at the demolished equipment. He sputtered in utter disbelief, his brain unable to compute the scene in front of him. Nearby, Instructor Ling Yun's voice was laced with equal shock. He admitted he never saw this coming. Just yesterday afternoon, Chengdu was still at the advanced stage, but overnight, he'd shattered his limits. He had achieved first-order perfection. Chengdu stood awkwardly next to the wreckage, nervously scratching the back of his head as he apologized to the principal. He stammered that he had no idea the machine was so fragile. Ling Yun, however, couldn't have cared less about the broken equipment. His face was lit up with a wild, feverish excitement. He roared that Chengdu was, without a doubt, a combat prodigy. That killer instinct was on another level. He raved on, saying that in all his years of teaching, he had never once encountered a student whose battle sense was so terrifyingly polished. It was like Chengdu had clawed his way through countless life or death struggles. His instincts were just insanely sharp. Chengdu just stood there, his face a little red, as he clutched his sword. The principal, hand on his chin, sank into a deep, calculating silence. After a long moment, his decision was made. He declared that Chengdu was a true martial arts genius who needed to be fast-tracked immediately. For now, he ordered that Chengdu receive the same resources as the #1 ranked student. He then added that he would personally pull the strings to get Chengdu's special recruitment sorted out. As for the upcoming 100 Cities tournament, he told Chengdu to aim for nothing less than a top 3 finish. If he could pull that off, the rest would be a done deal. Chengdu hesitantly raised his hand, asking what special recruitment even was. Ling Yun calmly explained that to get into one of the 8 great schools the normal way, through the college exam, a student's life strength needed to hit at least a level 6.5. Given Chengdu's current level, reaching that score before the exam was basically impossible. But the special recruitment track was a different game. For that route, the main requirement was hitting first-order perfection in martial skill, at least 1 month before the exam. After the 100 Cities tournament, professors from Mount Everest and Mount Tai would personally scout him. If he blew them away, he'd get an offer on the spot. Chengdu processed this, then posed another question. He wanted to know if, after getting a special recruitment offer, he could still take the regular exam and try for a different university. Ling Yun gave him a curious look, asking if he already had a dream school in mind. Chengdu didn't hesitate. He admitted that if he had the choice, he wanted to go to Huangshan Martial Arts University. But instructor Ling Yun was baffled, hitting Chengdu with a simple question. Out of all the elite academies, why Huangshan Martial Arts University? Since all 8 of the top schools were swimming in similar resources, Chengdu laid out a memory that was seared into his mind. It all went back 6 years ago, in the Yunlai district of Huishi City. A nightmare descended without warning. Giants. They materialized out of thin air and began their rampage. Huishi's defense corps scrambled, and soldiers from neighboring cities poured in to reinforce them, but their forces were stretched thin. Despite a heroic defense, the city was drowning in blood. In the brutal chaos that followed, tens of thousands of lives were extinguished. The scars of that day never faded. With a chilling quietness, Chengdu revealed his core motivation. "I just want my family to have a safe life," he said, his gaze hardening into steel. "If Liang City is ever on the brink, I need the power to race back home in an instant and become their shield." Ling Yun stared at him, feeling the immense gravity of those words. He observed that a conviction that strong was usually forged in the fires of total loss. Then, a flicker of respect entered his voice. To harbor that kind of unshakable resolve at his age, while his family was still whole and safe, it proved Chengdu was the kind of man who could shoulder an immense burden. Chengdu raised his hand, his voice steady. "I'll consider the other 2 schools as my backup plan," he stated. "Only if I fail to get into Mount Huang. So, can I choose them as my alternatives?" From behind the desk, the principal's reply was like stone. He spelled it out. The moment Chengdu passed the early special admission, he'd be signing an ironclad contract that bound him exclusively to their school. A bit later, Teacher Ling broke it down for him even further. If Chengdu could just secure a rank in the 100 Cities Hegemony tournament next month, getting into those other 2 schools would be a guaranteed lock. Special admission would even slash the required score by another 100 points. But he also painted a grim picture of the road ahead. If Chengdu skipped this golden opportunity, his life intensity would have to hit a monstrous 6.5, and even then, the score reduction would cap out at a measly 30 points. "Don't gamble with your future," he urged. Chengdu offered a faint smile, thanking them both for their counsel. "I'll give it some serious thought," he promised. Moments later, outside the school gates, Chengdu was just another face in the bustling crowd of students. He ran the timeline through his head. Early admissions wouldn't even kick off until after the 100 Cities tournament, which was still over a month out. As he stepped onto the crosswalk, a new strategy began to form. From this day forward, until the final college entrance exam, he would dedicate every waking moment to the exclusive martial arts room the school gave him, grinding non-stop to elevate his power. But another idea sparked in his mind. He could accelerate the process. He could try using potent medicines to supercharge his life intensity gains. And he knew exactly where to get what he needed. After all, the Technology Martial Palace had everything. Walking out into the open, Chengdu's gaze was fixed on the horizon, his mind mapping out the power structure of his world. At the very top, there were 3 colossal forces, the pillars of their entire high martial civilization. These behemoth organizations were the shield protecting humanity's very existence. First, you had the ones staring down alien empires on the front line. the legendary Extreme Martial Palace. The second Titan, dedicated to elevating humanity's raw power to new heights, was known as the Technology Martial Palace. And the third, the enforcers of order across all human territories, was the formidable Martial Artist Alliance. Then there was the legendary founder of the Technology Martial Palace himself, Durags, widely hailed as the second strongest person in all of civilization. Chengdu knew that while Durags' combat power didn't surpass the legendary Yan, his staggering contributions to humanity's evolution were undeniable. With his plan set, Chengdu stepped into a shop with a grand, spacious hall. A woman in a sharp blue dress spotted him and glided over with a warm smile, offering her assistance. Chengdu met her gaze directly. "I need to purchase 3 boxes of Thunder Chi blood pills," he said, his tone polite but firm. The woman's professional smile froze on her face. Her eyes shot wide as she echoed his request in disbelief. "Sir," she stammered, "that medicine, it can't be bought directly. You're required to pass an endurance test first," she explained, gesturing for him to come with her. That was news to Chengdu, but he followed her lead. As they walked, she elaborated that the Thunder Chi blood pill was a top-tier Chi blood medicine available to non-martial artists, but it came with some serious risks. The moment you ingest it, the pill's raw energy transforms into a raging thunderstorm that surges through your body's meridians. She warned that, if the user's mental focus wavered for even a second within a 30-minute window, that internal storm would spiral out of control, placing them in mortal danger. They arrived in a room packed with advanced testing equipment. The girl gestured toward a sleek machine and welcomed Chengdu inside. "Because of that danger," she continued, "the endurance test is mandatory before any purchase is authorized." She turned to face him one last time. "If you don't have any other questions, I'll begin the test now." Chengdu simply rested his hand on the diagnostic pad and nodded. "I'm ready." The girl moved over to the control panel, but as the results flashed onto the screen, her expression morphed into one of pure confusion. Something was wrong. The readings made no sense. And then, she handed Chengdu the pills. She scrambled away, fumbling for her phone, and frantically telling the tech department that the Thunder Chi blood pill tester was completely busted. All the while, Chengdu strolled out of the room, looking completely unfazed, as if he hadn't just shattered their equipment. Later, back in the sanctuary of his exclusive training room at school, Chengdu dropped his bag and settled onto the floor. He immediately scanned the instructions. A single pill per day for 10 days completed one cycle, but you could megadose with up to 3 pills at once. The catch? Tripling the dose amplified the pain by 5 times. No matter the dose, though, the agonizing effects would last for a full 30 minutes. But after 3 to 5 cycles, the body would start building a tolerance, and the medicine's potency would plummet. Chengdu examined the pills in his palm. He scoffed, realizing the so-called endurance test he'd taken was barely the equivalent pain of half a pill. For him, this was a cakewalk. He broke down the math in his head. Swallowing all 3 pills would unleash a surge of pain 10 times more intense than the initial test. He was betting he could handle it. Without a flicker of doubt, Chengdu threw his head back and downed all 3 pills in one go. In the next instant, it hit him like a lightning strike. His eyes shot wide open as a tidal wave of unimaginable pain crashed through his entire being. A raw, untamed power erupted from within. Chengdu's entire body violently arched backward as pure electricity detonated in the room around him. Vicious tendrils of blue lightning coiled around every inch of him, crackling with savage intensity. His muscles locked up, and he gritted his teeth against the onslaught. He endured the cataclysmic surge as a hurricane of power tore through his meridians, engulfing the room in a blinding thunderstorm of energy. Several minutes crawled by, with arcs of electricity still dancing across Chengdu's skin. Despite the sweat pouring down his face, he lifted his head and let out a wild, manic grin. With a shaky smile, he taunted the pain. "Is that all you got?" A few more minutes later, the lightning finally subsided. Utterly drained, Chengdu collapsed forward, breathing in ragged gasps while his clothes clung to his sweat-drenched body. As he exhaled a long, shuddering breath, a shimmering blue system window materialized before him. The notification read that his life intensity had leveled up from 5.2 to 5.3. Seeing that tiny increase, Chengdu's eyes lit up with fierce determination. He clenched his fist, feeling the rush. "I'm one step closer to hitting 6.5, he whispered to himself. As long as he could keep accelerating his progress, he was absolutely determined to reject the offer for early special admission. His gaze shifted to the remaining pills in the box beside him. He muttered, the original plan was to make these last for an entire month, but now, it looked like he only had enough for another 10 days of this intense regimen. Based on his current balance, a quick mental calculation told him his funds would be completely drained in just 55 days. Slumped on the training room floor, Chengdu leaned against the cool wall. If that's the case, he resolved, then there's only one path forward. He had to fight his way into the top 2 of the 100-city showdown. It was the only way he could secure the insane amount of cash needed to fuel his rapid growth. But as this new resolve hardened within him, his body suddenly gave out, and he crumpled to the floor. His frame was still trembling from the aftershocks of the thunderous energy. He struggled to move, realizing the side effects were far more brutal than he had anticipated. He reasoned that the rampaging thunder energy still coursing through his veins had left him temporarily paralyzed. With his physical body completely wrecked for the moment, he switched his focus. It was time to level up his mental power instead. With unwavering resolve, he closed his eyes and declared inwardly, "Time to enter the crystal space." The next morning, Chengdu's eyes snapped open as he sat bolt upright. His expression was calm and intensely focused. He replayed the night's events in the crystal space, where he had spent hours relentlessly slaughtering green firefly giants. Even though he hadn't completely conquered them yet, he could feel a significant surge in his mental fortitude. He vividly recalled the feeling of being on that ethereal battlefield, charging forward before launching himself high into the air. He remembered the powerful swing of his blade, unleashing a brilliant arc of blue energy as he slashed down on the grotesque creature. A faint smile touched his lips at the memory. He had also just gotten a notification about the school's resource subsidy. Knowing that crucial support had finally arrived, he felt a jolt of excitement and thought, "I can't wait to get to class." He made his way to the classroom, where a teacher with fiery red hair and glasses commanded the front of the room. This was Yade, the mental power instructor for the prestigious Hongji class, and a high-ranking member of the Martial Artist Alliance. She announced the day's lesson, telling the students they were about to get an advanced preview of a critical combat method for martial artists, mental power attachment. Seated in the front row, Chen thought to himself that this mental power course was an exclusive perk of being in the Hongji class. In fact, only students who had achieved Tier 2 mental power were even permitted to learn it. He noted that the instructor leading the course had a life intensity rating above 15, an absolutely staggering level of power. The red-haired teacher continued her lecture, explaining that the more skilled a martial artist becomes, the more their physical strength develops. But, she added, if one could properly master their mental power, they could achieve twice the results with half the effort. She broke it down for them, explaining that raw physical power from martial arts just spreads out across the body. But mental power, that's the game changer. It concentrates all that scattered energy into a single, devastating point, jacking up your explosive force. A diagram flashed in the lesson, showing all that energy getting focused. The teacher explained that mental power attachment is the skill of making every single fiber of your being pull its weight in perfect sync. As she spoke, Chengdu glanced around the room. He realized nobody else was even batting an eye at this explanation. Not a single surprised face. And that's when it hit him everyone else must have already grinded this skill out. They were way ahead of the curve. Then, Teacher Yadi hit them with a reality check. She warned that until your mental power hits Tier 10, the amount of physical strength you can actually command is seriously pathetic. She basically told them not to waste time on it before the big college entrance exam. The main goal, she stressed, was still leveling up their life intensity. With a sharp clap of her hands, she switched gears. "All right, pop quiz time," she announced. "We're testing everyone's mental power." She ordered all the students to their feet. As she lifted her hand, a shimmering flute materialized above her palm, crackling with a faint light. She stood at the head of the class, taking command of the room. She announced her plan, to use a short flute to play the Song of Exhaustion, a little tune designed to reveal exactly how much mental juice each of them was packing. She added that she was hoping to see some better scores than last semester. The students all stood by their desks as she paced forward, the glowing instrument in her hand. Then, her gaze landed directly on Chengdu. She told him, straight up, that he could sit this one out if he wanted. She made it clear the test wouldn't impact his exam score. Chengdu just stared back at her, a confused look on his face. He knew exactly what she was thinking. She probably figured he'd collapse the second she played a single note, because his mental power was only Tier 1. The disrespect. She was just trying to save him from a massive L. But with a new fire in his eyes, Chengdu squared his shoulders and shot back a firm answer. "I'll participate." The teacher just offered a faint smile and a nod. She thought to herself how kids were always trying to one-up each other. Mental power wasn't some simple party trick to master, and even the elite students in the Hongji class found it a struggle. Still, since teacher Ling Yun had a special interest in this one, she'd let him try. Her plan was simple. Let him faceplant, then pull him aside afterward for a little private coaching session. She raised the flute to her lips and gave one final command. "Focus your minds," she announced, "and resist with everything you've got. My song will drain your body and your spirit." Through it all, Chengdu stood with a look of pure resolve, bracing himself for whatever she was about to unleash. The entire class roared back in unison, shouting that they were ready. The teacher lifted her instrument and began her performance. A shockwave of brilliant purple energy exploded outwards, twisting around her as musical notes took physical form in the air. The song of exhaustion flooded the classroom, bathing her entire body in a shimmering violet aura. Chengdu stood his ground as the wave of power rolled toward him. He looked up, his expression a mix of awe and shock, as the purple light descended upon him. In his mind's eye, a bizarre new image appeared. A dark, humanoid shadow, wrapped in that same intense purple aura, materialized right in front of him. The being slowly turned its head to face him. Chengdu stared, completely bewildered, wondering what on earth he was seeing. But in the next instant, his eyes flew wide as the shadow figure charged, slicing through the mental illusion with a devastating attack. The creature launched a savage kick, but Chengdu reacted on instinct, throwing up a hand to block the blow. A blast of purple energy erupted from the impact. Chengdu was floored. This thing in his head could actually move. He instantly recognized it, a spiritual-style physical hypnosis. A confident smirk spread across his face as he balled his fist, totally prepared to counter whatever this phantom threw at him next. Outside, the teacher slowly lowered her flute, her eyes locked on Chengdu. She was in absolute shock. Chengdu was just standing there, calm and collected, completely unbothered by the crushing, spiritual pressure that was still suffocating the room. She watched him, dumbfounded, realizing he was actually holding his own. He wasn't even breaking a sweat or grimacing in pain. In fact, he looked so casual, you'd think he was just chilling and grabbing a drink. Chengdu had closed his eyes, standing perfectly still inside the swirling purple storm, his breathing impossibly steady and calm. The teacher pressed the flute back to her lips, forced to admit that this kid's mental fortitude was on a whole other level than she'd anticipated. A spark of curiosity ignited in her eyes. Just how far could this boy go? She decided then and there to crank the spiritual pressure up by another level. A fresh explosion of purple energy pulsed from her as she played with renewed intensity. All around the classroom, students were starting to drop like flies. Some were trembling, their legs giving out from under them. Others just crumpled to the floor, totally wiped out, and unable to resist any longer. Cries echoed through the room. "I can't stand. I feel so drained. I can't do it." The teacher watched as bodies crumpled to the floor and gave a slight nod. This was exactly how she predicted it would go. Most people couldn't handle the song of exhaustion. At this intensity, her eyes narrowed, locking onto Chengdu, a flicker of curiosity in her gaze. But her expression shattered into shock when she saw him still standing, barely reacting. A violent purple spiritual aura twisted and coiled behind Chengdu, but he remained anchored to his spot. Nearby, students stared, their minds completely blown. One of them screamed that Chengdu was still holding on. They were all floored because they knew his family was dirt poor. There was no way they could ever bankroll spiritual resources. They began to wonder if he was secretly a spiritual power prodigy. The teacher, however, was the most stunned because she knew that martial talent and spiritual power were two entirely different skill trees. Yet somehow, Chengdu seemed to be specced into both. In all her years, she'd never seen anyone possess that kind of insane combination. Peng Hu, who had face-planted early on, looked up from the ground with a massive, relieved grin. He chuckled to himself, feeling a surge of pride, because the more of a beast Chengdu was, the less pathetic his own defeat yesterday seemed. Suddenly, a sharp crack echoed through the room. Students whipped their heads toward the sound, their eyes wide, startled by the abrupt shift in spiritual pressure. The noise was Mo Liti, finally crashing to the ground under the crushing weight of the song. He just lay there, completely drenched in sweat. Everyone stared at him in utter disbelief. They all knew he wasn't just a martial talent, he had a gift for spiritual power too. With a better family background, that dude could have been a top contender for the 3 great elite academies. The teacher's eyes were practically bugging out of her head. She saw Mo Lete, the #1 student in her class, tap out at level 6, yet Chengdu had just tanked level 7 like it was nothing. Overcome with shock, she decided to up the ante. She raised the flute to her lips again, about to unleash the soul-crushing power of level 8. The moment the next wave hit, Chengdu's entire body trembled. He gasped, barely managing to stay on his feet as the overwhelming spiritual pressure flooded his senses. In his mind, the humanoid opponent he'd been fighting morphed into a towering spiritual titan, a colossal, muscle-bound figure glowing with ferocious purple energy. It loomed over him, its aura making the very ground of his mindscape quake. The giant swung its massive fist, sending a cataclysmic shockwave hurtling straight for Chengdu. He crossed his arms in a desperate block, but the raw force still launched him backward in a blinding explosion of light. He gritted his teeth as the immense weight pressed down on him. He couldn't believe the sheer power behind that single punch. Chengdu looked up, sweat plastering his hair to his face, his eyes widening in horror, as he realized the next attack was already coming, even faster and heavier than the last. The pressure finally subsided, and Chengdu dropped to one knee, breathing hard as a ragged exhale escaped his lips. The spiritual combat had completely drained him, and he was learning the hard way that this kind of battle didn't just exhaust the spirit, it absolutely shredded the body. The teacher just stared, her mind reeling in disbelief. She kept replaying what she just witnessed. For someone's spiritual power to eclipse their own life force was practically unheard of. To her, this was a straight-up miracle. And Chengdu didn't just have an absurdly high spiritual power level. His martial arts talent was also terrifyingly high. She pictured the monster he could become, a warrior who could just ignore spiritual attacks and rely on his terrifying physical strength to rip his enemies apart. Her expression grew tense as one thought consumed her. Chengdu was the perfect warrior to fight against the Big Eye civilization. Sometime later, we cut to the principal's office. The principal was absolutely losing his mind over the report that Chengdu possessed a dual talent for both martial skills and spiritual power. Inside the room, Teacher Yadian nodded emphatically. She confirmed that she had personally double-checked everything during the class exercise. The stunned principal, a man with a mane of wild hair, leaned back in his chair, completely blown away. Teacher Ling chimed in that he'd just finished a one-on-one with Chengdu about his circumstances. From his professional standpoint, Chengdu had the raw potential to hit level 20 to become a skywalking warrior. At that, Teacher Yadian's jaw dropped. She turned to Teacher Ling and asked if he meant a literal skywalking warrior, someone who could actually take flight. The principal leaned forward, his face dead serious. He explained that skywalking warriors were insanely rare, like a 1 in 10,000 prodigy. A genius of Chengdu's caliber, he insisted, would be an absolute waste in these 8th grade schools. He declared that Chengdu needed to be aiming for one of the 3 great elite martial academies, the kind of legendary schools that don't accept students from normal exams, and only scout individuals with the potential to become skywalking warriors. The principal then dropped the bombshell, revealing he'd already gotten confirmation that, after the 100 Cities tournament, the legendary Black Dragon Martial Arts University, one of the Elite 3, would be holding its freshman selection right there in Cyber City. He gave Teacher Ling a direct order: persuade Chengdu to participate at all costs. Teacher Ling snapped his hand up in a salute, his voice ringing with confidence as he replied that he was on it. Later, in the school office, Chengdu walked through the door and asked the teacher why he had been summoned. Inside, Teacher Ling sat at his desk and got straight to the point. He asked Chengdu if he'd ever heard of Black Dragon University. Chengdu simply nodded. He said he knew of them, that it was one of the 3 legendary elite academies, though he was pretty clueless beyond that. Teacher Ling started breaking it down for Chengdu. He explained that these top-tier schools don't bother with normal entrance exams. They exclusively scout for certified geniuses, the ones with the raw potential to shatter their limits and become a skywalking warrior. He made it clear that fighters on that level were in a league of their own, operating on a god-tier status way above your average martial artist. To even get a shot at that, Ling explained, a warrior needs a life strength rating of at least 9.9, and their combat skills have to hit the first-order intermediate stage. Then, his voice dropping low, Teacher Ling revealed a harsh truth. Among all high school warriors, less than half ever reach that intermediate skill level. While you could technically boost life strength with blood-enhancing medicine, most people were simply too broke to afford that kind of high-end gear. He drove the point home, saying countless students couldn't even buy basic blood supplements. By the time they finally scraped enough money together later in life, their prime training window had slammed shut. He looked at Chengdu and asked if he'd ever considered this grim reality. Chengdu was dead silent, his face impossible to read. After a long, heavy moment, he finally found his voice. He looked Teacher Ling in the eye and said he was going to take a shot at the Black Dragon Martial Arts University's selection. But then he admitted the one thing holding him back. If he had a choice, he would never want to leave his family. This path was a huge gamble. If he walked away, it could be for good. Teacher Ling gave a firm nod. He urged Chengdu to push forward with everything he had. With his current stats, he was a guaranteed lock for the 8th grade schools if he went the special recruitment route. Teacher Ling told him he should use those schools as a safety net while aiming straight for Black Dragon Martial Arts University, because his future was meant for something much, much bigger. Taking all that in, Chengdu's gaze fell to the floor. He figured there was still 1 month until the 100 Cities tournament. He needed to lock in and focus on that first. The rest could wait until after he saw the results. The scene then cuts to Chengdu's home. As he walks in, a voice from inside calls out, letting him know breakfast is ready and to come and get it. Chengdu, still wearing his backpack, steps into his house and calls back to his mom. When he sees her holding out a plate, he immediately says he's on his way. At the breakfast table, his younger sister pauses mid-chew and shoots him a curious look. She couldn't help but wonder why her brother had such a different vibe lately. The more she watched him, the more she saw it. He looked more fit, more handsome, and he had this mysterious aura he never had before. Chengdu took his seat and addressed his family. He told his dad, mom, and sister that from now on, he was planning to live at school. He needed to dedicate every waking moment to training, to get ready for the 100 Cities tournament, which was just 1 month away. A worried look crossed his mother's face as she asked if he would get enough rest. She told him that working hard is one thing, but he had to take care of himself. She was terrified he might collapse again. His sister brought up another problem. She questioned if the school could even get him a dorm room at this point, since housing gets sorted out way before the semester even starts. Chen-du just offered a calming smile. He told his mother not to worry about a thing. The school was hooking him up with a ton of support, so he wouldn't run into the same issues as last time. Chen-du coolly explained to his family that every single student in the elite Hongji class is given a private martial arts chamber that comes with its own personal rest area. He assured them he could train and rest there without any issues. Hearing this, his father nodded, his face filled with pride. He gave his blessing, telling Chen-du to keep that drive and give it his all. He said if Chen-du ever needed anything, all he had to do was ask. His dad then raised a triumphant fist and told him to charge full speed ahead. Chen-du shot back a solid, "Yeah," and stood up from the table. He announced he was done eating and was leaving for school. In an instant, his family started hyping him up. His mother told him to take care. His father called him a good kid and told him to grind hard. His sister grinned from ear to ear and yelled at him to come back with the championship trophy. Chen-du walked away, their words of support fueling his resolve, the weight of their expectations on his back. The morning fog hung low over the campus as Chen-du made his way in. The sprawling sports field and the massive school building emerged slowly from the mist. He walked with purpose through the martial building, his bag secure on his back. A mental inventory of his new supplies flashed through his mind. 90 bags of blood-boosting milk, 30 blood-boosting pills, and 4 packs of perfect blood powder. He knew all the resources the school had provided were already waiting in his personal martial chamber. All told, the gear was worth at least 50,000. It really hit him then. Martial arts was a sport for the wealthy. He placed his palm on a glowing access panel, bringing the chamber to life. He made a vow that from this point forward, besides attending class, his entire existence would revolve around training. The chamber door hissed open. He stepped over the threshold, standing tall with unwavering determination, and balled his hand into a tight fist as he faced the training dummy in the dimly lit room. Sword in hand, Chen-du barked out a command, telling Little Bear to crank the gravity up 5 times normal. The system's mechanical voice instantly complied. A shockwave of blue energy erupted around him as the crushing weight descended. His jaw clenched, and beads of sweat popped on his temples. His knuckles whitened around his sword as he braced himself. The gravity was crushing, like having 15 full-grown elephants sitting on his chest. But as he squared off against a training machine under that immense weight, a flash of pure excitement lit up his eyes. The 4th training round kicked off. The combat dummy jolted to life, its optical sensors glowing a menacing red. Chen-du dropped into a low stance, sword raised, staring down the towering machine. Defying the heavy gravity, he surged forward with a powerful strike. In this high-G environment, he knew a single misstep could mean torn muscles or even shattered bones, so he knew better than to meet any attack head-on. As the dummy swung its arm in a deadly arc, he pivoted, instantly altering his attack vector. The sheer force of the counterblow sent him rolling across the floor, narrowly dodging the crimson trajectory of the blade. The dummy's internal AI analyzed his every twitch. A report flashed: evasion efficiency, 87%. But his energy consumption was off the charts. The machine recommended he cut out all unnecessary movements. A split second later, it attacked again. With simultaneous high and low strikes, Chen-du realized it had completely boxed him in, cutting off all standard escape routes. But instead of backing down, a determined smirk played on his lips. He thought to himself, if he couldn't dodge, then he'd just have to make this hunk of junk feel the pressure, too. Chen-du exploded off the ground with all his might, his foot cracking the floor tiles as he launched himself into the air. The training dummy swung its long arms down to smash him, but he met the assault head-on, his sword arcing up to intercept. The two forces clashed in a brutal mid-air collision under the insane gravity, spraying fragments of pure energy everywhere as the impact resonated. The dummy staggered back, smoke pouring from its chassis, while Chen-du landed softly on one foot, perfectly balanced. The damaged machine's eyes burned even brighter. It initiated an emergency protocol, announcing its final gambit. A violent torrent of power erupted from its core. The dummy's limbs suddenly stretched to impossible lengths, lashing out from every direction at once. Chen-du could only stare in disbelief as it lunged, unleashing its full power. He yelled out in pure frustration. He was stunned that the machine could literally cheat like that. Before he could even think, his world became a blur as the dummy's full-speed assault tore through the training chamber. The training dummy coiled its limbs tightly around Chen-du, locking him in a bizarre grapple. Chen-du let out a ragged breath and ordered Little Bear to deactivate the gravity mode. He grunted that it was over and that the dummy could release him now. But the machine was stuck in a loop, repeating its last command. Final gambit, final gambit. When it finally powered down and let him go, Chengdu collapsed into a cross-legged position. He could feel his body screaming at its absolute limit. He muttered that he would use the void, immortal visualization method, to boost his spiritual power and let his body recover. As he shut his eyes, his consciousness plunged into another dimension. His shadow stretched out beneath him, like a river of black ink, as strange red sigils floated through the air. A colossal red entity hovered in the distance, a silent observer. Chengdu centered himself in the void as a whirlwind of blue energy enveloped him. He urged his spiritual power to climb higher, to absorb more experience. A moment later, his eyes snapped open. He checked his stats. His spiritual power had jumped by 0.3 levels. But just as he moved to stand up, he winced, a jolt of pain shooting through him. His legs were completely numb. Chengdu quickly popped a recovery pill. He admitted it, his mind was fried and his body was still a wreck. Since that was the case, there was only one thing to do. Sleep. He just flopped onto his back, arms splayed out, letting his entire body go limp as his eyelids slowly drifted shut. He slipped into a state of deep calm. In that quiet mental space, he knew it was time to enter the crystal dimension and truly sharpen his martial arts. When he next opened his eyes, he was surrounded by massive, shimmering crystal pillars. His grip tightened on his sword as he stood ready. His footsteps echoed ominously as he took a step forward. Right in front of him, several green flame giants materialized from the mist, their monstrous silhouettes looming over him. He remembered them from last time. Back then, he couldn't even figure out their weakness, let alone kill a single one. But now, sword in hand, he stood his ground. This time, he was ready to see what he was really made of. Chengdu casually rested the blade on his shoulder, a potent blue spiritual energy swirling to life behind him, causing the air itself to ripple as he faced the giants with ice-cold eyes. His attack slammed into one of the behemoths, and as the blow connected, everything clicked into place. He realized those green patches all over their bodies weren't curses or some weird birthmarks. They were concentrated sources of healing energy. With this revelation, he moved in a flash. He vaulted onto the giant's shoulder and plunged his sword directly into one of the green patches, making the monster roar in agony. He kept analyzing their moves. Besides those healing spots, the green flame giants were just massive health sponges with nothing else going for them. As long as he took out the green patches first, they were no threat at all. He charged forward, a fresh wave of confidence surging through him. Fresh off that insane gravity training, his control felt razor sharp. Back in normal G, he was practically weightless, twisting midair to bring his sword crashing down. His eyes locked onto another vulnerability, a tiny opening. His knuckles whitened around the hilt. This was his shot. He unleashed a brutal downward slash, shattering the giant's guard as a burst of crimson energy exploded from the impact. Chengdu's strike landed with crushing force. One of the behemoths was sent flying backward, its arms flailing wildly as it collapsed. But behind him, flashes of light rained down as more giants spawned in, their scarlet eyes burning through the darkness. Unfazed, Chengdu stood his ground, sword held loose at his side, as an aura of cobalt flame began to coil around him. He felt light, almost buoyant. A thrill shot through him. He made a mental note. The second he logged out, he was jumping straight back into gravity training. With one last surge, he rocketed forward. He knew if he just kept grinding like this, stacking up these small victories, a top 3 finish in the 100 Cities tournament was totally within his grasp. Flash forward to the next day in High City, where the air was electric. The long-awaited 100 Cities tournament had finally begun. The whole city was buzzing. Chengdu followed his crew into a ridiculously grand hotel, his eyes wide as he tried to take it all in. The place was dripping with luxury, a whole different world for him. The instructors were already yelling for the team to stay together. As Chengdu gaped at the surroundings, a voice suddenly ripped through the lobby, demanding to know why they wouldn't let him sign in. Chengdu's head whipped around. It was some guy named Wu Zong, a competitor from the Lu City team. He slammed both palms on the counter, his face a mask of pure fury as he screamed that he had obviously made it before the deadline. He demanded to know why they were messing with him and insisted they give him a straight answer. The terrified receptionist stumbled back, her hands flying up defensively against his aggressive vibe. Wu Zong dipped his chin, his eyes narrowing into dangerous slits that radiated pure menace. His hand drifted down to the sword at his hip, his fingers wrapping tightly around the hilt. Chengdu's stomach dropped. Was this dude seriously about to draw his weapon in the middle of a hotel lobby? Chengdu felt a piercing wave of sword intent radiate from Wu Zong. His eyes widened in disbelief. This guy's power level might actually rival his own. Liu Bo and Mo Lei Tai muttered beside him, completely shook that some loudmouth thug could be packing that much heat. And that's when she appeared on the balcony above, a girl with a cascade of violet hair, calmly observing the chaos. She stepped forward with an undeniable air of command. Her name was Zhao Xiaogu, a top player for the host team, High City. She coolly ordered the staff to deal with Wu Zong. She announced that he could sign in, but as for his teammates, they were officially disqualified. All this from her perch, high above the drama. The crowd below recognized her instantly, erupting into excited whispers. They all knew her as the Sea Princess. They were all stunned, saying she was way prettier in person than in any of her pictures. Some even remembered online comments saying she wasn't photogenic. Now, they saw the truth. Chen Du, however, just looked baffled by the nickname. His teammate Mo Leitai quickly filled him in. Zhao Xiaogu, the Sea Princess, was the one and only daughter of the principal of High City's #1 high school. She had the family connections, the power, the money, and the clout. On top of that, she was insanely talented. Everything about her was S tier, a true chosen one. He then bluntly told Chen Du he had zero chance. But Chen Du wasn't even listening. His eyes were glued to the girl with the purple hair, and he was completely frozen. A powerful wave of déjà vu washed over him. He was certain he had seen that face before. Then a memory flashed in his mind from an online sim match. Zhao Xiaogu, leaping through the air in a perfectly balanced, graceful spin. Her long hair whipped around her as she landed. Chen Du stared up, his eyes wide as the memory slammed into place. She was that troll from the virtual combat game, the little girl who sold nukes. Up on the balcony, Zhao Xiaogu leaned over the railing, completely oblivious. Chen Du studied her face, matching every detail. There was no doubt. He'd always just figured her avatar was a system-generated preset. He never imagined anyone could actually be that gorgeous in real life. A slow grin spread across his face, earning a curious look from his teammate. His mind raced back to their match. Even then, her skill was a cut above his, having already reached the peak of the First Order. There was no way she would recognize him now. Running into an old online rival like this was just surreal. He couldn't help but wonder just how much stronger she'd become. Suddenly, joining the 100 Cities tournament felt like the best call he'd ever made. Later on, the team huddled up in their hotel room. The door to room 301 clicked shut, and their instructor began dishing out some new intel. But there was a bigger problem. The higher-ups had just flipped the script on the tournament. Right before the elimination rounds, they were throwing in a brand new event. A badge battle. Chen Du whispered the words, trying to make sense of them. Slumped on the couch, he finally asked what the hell this new rule was even about. His instructor broke it down for them. The 100 Regions tournament was a 3-day gauntlet, broken into 3 distinct phases. Round 1 was kicking off the very next day. A badge hunt inside a massive forest arena, with a brutal 13-hour time limit. The objective for every single team was to snatch 2 specific badges, one marked Gao, and the other Wu. The instructor stressed that after they secured the goods, the entire squad had to haul it to the finish line and check in. Whether they passed or failed was all down to how many of them made it to the end together. Chen Du cut in, asking the million-dollar question, how many badges were in play? His instructor revealed there were only 50 Gao badges, and 50 Wu badges, meaning a maximum of 50 teams could possibly move on. The math was brutal. At least half the competition would be wiped out on day 1. From there, he explained, round 2 was a straight-up 1 versus 1 elimination bracket, with almost zero rest between fights. With a grim look, the instructor added that, over the course of a single day, they would slash the number of contenders from 150 down to the final 10. As for the third and final round, opponents would be picked randomly. With one exception, you wouldn't have to face your own teammates. At that news, Lubo and Molite visibly relaxed. Lubo muttered under his breath, stoked that he wouldn't have to go up against the absolute monster that was Chen Du. Molite nodded hard, just as thankful he wouldn't be their next opponent. The instructor kept going, laying out the last of the rules. He held up 3 fingers. Round 3 is the finals, he declared, the top 10 battle. Just getting to this point was a huge win, because every single person who made the top 10 would walk away with bonus exam points and a fat stack of cash. But he warned them that cracking the top 3 would depend entirely on their stamina and condition. The finals were 3 straight days of non-stop war, with practically no time to recover. Injuries weren't just possible, they were guaranteed. He made it clear that whoever took first place wouldn't just be the strongest in terms of pure power, but would be the most complete and well-rounded warrior out of everyone. Before wrapping up, he raised a single finger. One last thing, he said, and his entire vibe shifted, his expression darkening. He was about to give them the most critical rule of all. No killing, period. Not in the arena, and not in the real world. That rule was for life. Their real fight wasn't against each other. It was against civilizations from other worlds. You will never, he commanded, turn your blades on your own kind. Chen Du and the others took in his words in dead silence, as he continued. For the tournament, they'd be wearing special uniforms designed to equalize everyone's life force. The top brass would also be on the field, protecting them from the shadows. But then came the catch. If he ever had to step in and save them personally, their team would be disqualified on the spot. Then, with a calm smile, he offered some encouragement. Tomorrow is all on you. No matter what happens, just believe in yourselves. Give it everything you've got. That was all they needed. Chengdu and his team roared back in unison, yes. With looks of pure determination, the scene cuts hard to High City No. 1 High School, a massive campus dwarfed by futuristic skyscrapers. On the tournament grounds, an ocean of students stood in formation, their eyes locked on an instructor at the front. Behind him loomed a colossal gate, and beyond it stretched a dense, untamed wilderness. Chengdu stared, blown away. Is that a real forest? Just then, a man stepped forward. I am Zhou Cheng, he announced, principal of High City No. 1 High School and an organizer of this tournament. He scanned the faces of the young warriors. He gestured to the gate. Behind this gate lies a forest, he explained, one that was created by a dimensional rift centuries ago when the 9 major planets collided. We call this phenomenon a spirit realm. A spirit realm, the words echoed. This particular area, he continued, is the lowest of the low, a level 1 spirit realm known as the Forest of Dire Wolves. A jolt went through Chengdu. He knew exactly what a spirit realm was, a parallel world completely devoid of humans and absolutely swarming with monsters. The principal held up a hand. But don't panic. He assured them this spirit realm was an incredibly stable dimension. Its safety was even certified by the 3rd strongest person alive, Ryan, the legendary founder of the Warrior Alliance. And according to him, it was totally fine. But then his expression hardened. However, even with every precaution, this trial still carries a legitimate risk of death. Be extremely careful once you are inside, he commanded. He then singled out a student in the crowd, a tall swordsman named Wu Zong. Just because you came here alone, the principal warned him, doesn't mean you'll be fighting alone. We will be assigning you teammates based on your power levels. Wu Zong let out a sharp "Tisk," his annoyance practically radiating off him. Chengdu clocked the attitude immediately. This guy seriously looked like he had a problem with the entire world. He shot a quick glance at the principal, then strode over to the towering gate and let the biometric scanner read his eye. With a digital chime, the system gives the all clear. The massive gates grind open, unleashing a flood of brilliant light. The entrance is filled with shimmering blue particles, just floating on the air. Every student gathered outside just stares, completely captivated by the path unfolding before them. The principal's voice suddenly booms, announcing it's go time, and that everyone better be prepared for what's next. They were about to descend into the Forest of Dire Wolves. As the students bunch together, a radiant magic circle ignites beneath their feet. The intricate, glowing pattern rapidly expands across the entire plaza. Students whip their heads around, shocked, wondering if this crazy portal was actually the Forest of Dire Wolves. The principal, cool as a cucumber, lays it all out. He reveals that the spirit realm's true location is a heavily guarded secret. This magic circle they were all standing on was a high-tech gateway to the forest, a backup plan engineered by their predecessors. After immense effort, he explained that if the main dimensional rift ever collapsed without warning, this circle was their emergency exit to pull everyone out, in one piece. Then, he gave the order. All students were to get inside the circle immediately. In a flash, every single team would be teleported to one of 1,000 random drop points deep inside the Forest of Dire Wolves. He also hit them with a crucial warning. Out of the 300 badge locations marked on their maps, only 100 were the real deal. All the rest were elaborate fakes. With a simple, "Good luck," he finished. The circle began to pulse with power as a system voice echoed, announcing that the activation sequence was underway. A vortex of light swirled around the students as the circle flared to life. An explosive pillar of light shot straight into the sky. The blinding glow consumed everyone as the teleportation kicked in. A second later, Chengdu threw his hand up, shielding his eyes from the intense light beaming down from the sky. He was standing in the Forest of Dire Wolves, dwarfed by colossal trees as soft, white light streamed through the canopy. He looked around, completely stunned, and muttered to himself about whether this insane place could actually be the spirit realm. Mo Light was already focused, checking their map. He asked Chengdu which of the markers they should hit first. Chengdu scanned the holographic display and broke into a grin, saying they totally lucked out. There was a badge icon located insanely close to their spawn point. He suggested they scope it out to see if it was legit. His teammates were all in, and the squad pushed forward. Not too far off, a massive stone pillar stood eerily silent amongst the trees. A tiny symbol carved into it suddenly flashed. The instant a rock pelted its surface, a badge popped off the pillar and clattered to the ground, as a square display on the stone lit up with a piercing blue light. A glowing character materialized on the panel. The word GA appeared, confirming the badge was 100% valid. Chengdu lunged forward and snatched the glowing prize from the stone pillar. He admitted to his team that he was completely convinced that any marker so close to the drop zone had to be a decoy, but this thing was actually the real deal. One of his teammates, Lubo, let out a laugh and said Chengdu's luck was off the charts. He was just about to suggest which marker they should track down next, but Chengdu's expression suddenly went rigid. A flash of pure danger crossed his face. He grabbed Lubo's shirt and violently yanked him backward, screaming for him to get down. Not even a split second later, a volley of razor-sharp spears rained from the canopy, slamming into the ground right in front of them. Both Chengdu and his teammate scrambled backward as the deadly projectiles plunged deep into the earth, fracturing the ground around